Thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. So like Emma said, I'm Louise. And today I'll be talking about how to organize your Tableau workbooks for bliss and harmony. What do I mean by that? Well, whether you work within a team or you work on your own, organizing and documenting your workbooks is crucial. Why is that? Because most likely, eventually, you'll be handing over your workbooks to other colleagues, to your clients. Even on Tableau Public, someone might download your workbook, and you might even look back at your old workbooks. And you don't want to spend hours or make others spend hours picking through your messy workbooks trying to figure out what you've done. So it's better to, along the way, organize and document. Now, I'm sure you've seen workbooks that look something like this, where the data pane, the fields are named ambiguously. You don't know necessarily what they are without dragging it into the view. Or maybe your sets and parameters are named the default names. Or even worse, your calculations are named like that. And I'm sure they're all different calculations inside, but who can tell? So how can you avoid this? First of all, name your calculations. I'm going from what I think is most essential to really good to do. So name your calculations and your sets and groups and parameters. And when you name them something super descriptive. It's much more useful that way. Similarly, name your fields or your other dimensions something understandable. So I mean, avoid abbreviations, avoid contractions, if it makes sense. Use full words, like customer instead of cust, category instead of cat. It just avoids the next person having to think or spend a few moments dragging into the view to try and see what you're talking about. So it saves you and others time. Annotate your calculated fields. Now this one, I think is super important. It takes a bit of time, but it's worth doing. An example of this is the one on the right, which is one I've made about 6 months ago for building a trellis chart. But I actually opened up the workbook. It had no annotations, and it wasn't named trellis columns, and I forgot what it did. I'm not a mathematician. I had no idea. I had to figure out step by step what this calculation is. And I'm sure others who open up the workbook would have to do the same. So avoid that, do a double slash, write your comment, tell the user what they should do with this field, make it useful for them. And this is especially important if you're handing over to clients. Configure your default number formats. A good example of this is discount in Sample Superstore, where it's not immediately obvious whether the number in Superstore is already a percentage or if it's decimal that you need to turn into a percentage. And someone who isn't paying attention when they use your workbook might make a mistake and might end up coming to the wrong conclusions based on the wrong numbers. So just avoid all that confusion and configure your default number formats. So if it's a percentage, make it a percentage. Using folders to group similar fields. I love this one for when there are 20 plus fields in your data pane, or any amount where you'll need a scroll bar, or you use a search function really often. So I group similar fields together, fields that I use really often. So ID fields, date fields, anything that logically goes into a group that you use often and you don't want to search for. So it looks something like this. Then I know exactly where all my IDs are, where all my dates are. It saves me time in the long run, especially if I'm making a really long, complicated dashboard or workbook. Similarly, hierarchies, use them if they're appropriate. Comment on your fields. This isn't one that's done very often, and you don't need to do it for every field, but it can be useful for ones like segment in Superstore, where it's not obvious what segment means, but segment might be a term that's used in industry a lot. So you don't want to change the actual field name. Write a comment so that maybe a newbie who's never used it before can hover and see that segment means a type of customer. And lastly, color code your sheets and dashboards. This is a visual way of grouping together which sheets belong to which dashboards. Now, this is great when you're making your dashboards, so I don't need to actually read and remember what I named everything. I know that blue goes with blue. And yeah, so it's nice and organized, and it's helpful for anyone else opening up your dashboards. They don't need to figure out what sheets go in which. That's my last tip for you guys. Thank you very much. Any questions?